You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. What I thought would be a quieter week has ended up being very busy. I had another week of smaller projects working on content, updating code, and deciding which direction I want to go for a couple of different applications, but there are a few tidbits I gathered that I want to pass along. Here's what I learned. First up was I was able to update my LangChain4j sample project to reduce some of the boilerplate that I had by changing up the prompt variable injection. I was building the prompt manually in the book resource class, but I actually found a way to pass in the variables to the prompt from the book AI service. This was revolutionary to me. I was able to reduce some of the code and clean things up in my resource class, making it much easier to pass in basically these prompt variables. So that was really nice. I updated the code that is available on GitHub if you want to check that out. And of course, I'll be making more updates and tweaks as I go along where I find efficiencies. The next thing I will be really excited to explore is tools and agents with both Spring AI and LangChain4j. I was talking with some colleagues this week about how complicated the GraphRag process seems to be in several of the Java frameworks I've looked at, and they suggested, well, what about tools or agents? I was initially thinking that tools and agents have a higher risk for uncertainty for the LLM to use the tool, for instance. Sometimes LLMs decide they don't want to use a tool, or they can't find something, or they don't think it's the right tool for the job, and so they don't pick it up. But my colleagues reminded me that systems encompass workflow processes all the way to agentic systems, or more autonomy, if you will. So maybe I should frame it as tools equal more workflow, structured processes, if you will, and agents equal more autonomous workflows or systems, if you will. Knowledge graph, then, I could incorporate as a tool for the LLM to call and just set some strict boundaries or rules around trying to use that tool consistently. It's something I still need to explore and figure out how to do this and the code for that, but I am really excited to check this out. I would need to set it up more as a specific workflow rather than letting the LLM decide whether to use that tool or not. I also had kind of a breakthrough, I guess, in realizing which AI tools I use for certain things. There were a couple of times this week that I opened projects and I noticed myself start to open the project in one tool and then realize I actually wanted the other tool's features and then switch applications. And it cut both ways. There were a couple of times I wanted to open one app to work on a project and then realized I needed to switch, and vice versa, from the other app back to the first one. I'm not really using anything fancy. I'm not spending big subscriptions or anything like that, but there are a couple of things that are available to me, and I'll mention those as I go along. There are also some other higher end tools that I would love to explore. I just haven't really had the chance to do that and invested the time there yet, but I am hoping to do that in the future. So currently I'm defaulting to a couple of tools. First is IntelliJ IDEA with the coding assistant enabled. This, I think I am on the ultimate or the pro tier or whatever it is, past the community edition. And it will suggest things as I type. This is really nice. It'll show you the next method that you might want to type. It pops up definitions. It allows you to jump into source docs and things very easily by just a couple of clicks of keys, command shortcuts and things. This is really nice when I know what I want to code, but I might want to make some tweaks or have some suggestions for maybe I want to adjust this a little bit or change the style, or, oh, hey, there's a new method now that I didn't know was there before. It'll suggest that upcoming. This is more stream of consciousness code though, and where I know what I want to write, and the tool is just making suggestions as I go along. The other tool I like to use is VS Code or VS Code Insiders with the agent mode on. This tool I like to use when I want to ask about solving a specific problem, or I want the LLM to suggest cleaner ways to write a block or a method or something. Also, for some content suggestions, that's kind of nice if I'm stream of consciousness writing something and it'll pop up paragraphs or sentences as suggestions. And then I decide, no, I don't want to go that direction, or, oh, I actually do want to mention this thing. And so I'll add that in and tweak it as I go along. Then the third tool I like is plain old ChatGPT or some other web model for summarizing or writing brief bits of content with my own edits, of course. I do make a lot of adjustments to anything written by the LLM. I've also noticed that longer form content I prefer to write myself. Maybe you remember in school textbooks and teachers saying it's always harder to make your writing clear and concise. It's always harder to shorten something. I find LLMs do a pretty decent job at the first cut of condensing information. So if I give it something longer, something wordy, something I know that I want it to condense, it does a pretty decent job at condensing that. And then I make adjustments. Often it's to things that it picks out in that longer form content that it finds important. And I actually want to highlight another bullet point or another idea or topic more. And so I'll switch how it prioritizes those points. This is something I notice myself doing quite a bit. It summarizes really well, but then I have to adjust what it highlights or focuses on within that shortened, condensed version. These are the things I'm currently using: IntelliJ IDEA, VS Code or VS Code Insiders with agent mode, and then plain old ChatGPT. All of these tools are pretty nice. I don't use them for all of my coding, and I don't let it write huge blocks of things. And I haven't done a lot of, I guess you'd call it vibe coding at this point, but I am starting to see it creep in. And again, just noticing myself be drawn toward one tool or the other, depending on what I'm doing. And I hadn't noticed that leaning in on one particular thing or another until this week. Some ideas to throw at you if you're looking at exploring some of these things. If you have access to some of these tools or are able to try them out, these are the things that I'm using them for, and just find incremental, small baby step approaches to checking out what they have to offer. The content piece I want to look at this week is called Crafting a Local RAG Application with Quarkus. This builds an entirely local solution. Now, it does use Infinispan as the vector database and Granite LLM, which is a local LLM. I don't have any experience with either of these tools yet. I don't really know much about them even, but it's something that I would be willing to explore, of course, in the future. But what I really liked about this article is their diagrams. So the first architecture diagram shows that the data ingestion and the data retrieval pieces are separate components. They don't always have to be things like the lazy graph RAG idea where you're doing ingestion and retrieval at the same time. Concept, that is a different approach, but typically ingestion and retrieval for RAG applications are separate. I also really loved the second diagram, which shows more detail of the steps for each ingestion and retrieval and clearly divides the ingestion steps from the retrieval steps. I feel like there's been a lot of confusion that I've seen from developers and people that I've talked to on whether ingestion is a pre-step to RAG or if it happens during RAG. And typically the way I've seen it is that data prep occurs up front. So you have to do the embeddings, the splitting of your documents, and so on before you even look at building the RAG application. Then the article, once it gets past these concepts and diagrams, it dives right into implementation with code. There are some really nice details and explanations of each step, and the code is linked, plus some other resources at the end. Now, again, this uses Quarkus because I have recently dived into Quarkus and LangChain4j. This was right up my alley, and all of the code looked very familiar. This was nice to reiterate some of those things and just look at more code. I made some progress this week, and I'm really excited about tearing into the tools and agents for Spring AI and LangChain4j soon. I updated my LangChain4j sample app with an improvement to reduce boilerplate, and then chatted about the AI tools I'm currently using and for what tasks. Next, I highlighted a Quarkus application with RAG that included clear diagrams on ingestion versus retrieval steps. We'll see where next week takes me. Thanks for listening, and happy coding.